Welcome to this Energy Quick Chat where we rub minds with stakeholders in the energy markets. I am Justina Okechukwu. Now, Africa's population is growing at a very fast pace, and so is the continent's demand for energy. However, the continent faces a dual challenge of expanding access to electricity while transitioning to cleaner and more sustainable energy sources. This was part of the conversation at the Africa Energy Forum held recently in Nairobi. But one has to wonder why financing is a major dilemma in Africa's clean energy adoption and how the continent can progress further. To unpack this for me is my guest, Rumundaka Wonodi. He's the founder and CEO at ZKJ Energy Partners and pioneer CEO of the Nigerian Bulk Electricity Trading Company, or NBET. Thank you for joining me on Energy Frontiers today, sir.
Thank you for having me, Justina.
Now, let's speak about your key takeaways from the 2023 Africa Energy Forum in Nairobi.
Oh, well, the central thing, as you can imagine, it's about energy transition and the effects of climate change. So what you hear from the African countries, the nations, and even the institutions is that, yes, there's a need to adopt cleaner forms of energy. But for Africa, the more important issue, the priority is energy access. And to the extent that adoption of renewable energy technologies work for us, then that it's a very good thing. So in context, take for instance the AFDB, which is doing a lot to empower nations and providing some form of funding, grants, and technical support. Made the point again that when it comes to global emissions, that African countries in power just contribute about 3% of the emissions, and that is negligible. And as one said, if you were to turn off all the power plants in Africa, you wouldn't even notice any change in the emissions in the world. So Africa should focus more on energy access. And one way to do that is adoption of, things like solar, mini hydros, which at the end of the day are renewable energy resources. But so that's the discussion. And so it's no more energy transition. It has to be just energy transition. It's got to be fair. It's got to be equitable. And it has to work for everyone, not just energy transition. And we had the opportunity of the COP, is that COP28, the one that is going to happen this year later in United Arab Emirates. So the chairman of the organizing committee was there, and he also supported the view held by the African nations that look, it has to be just when it comes to energy transition. So that is my major takeaway about the central discussions that dominating the space.
Now, I'll have to wonder, what precisely are the challenges to transmission and distribution in the energy network?
So first is funding. In some instances, there is also the issue of the landscape, as in, you have dispersed population. So think about Nigeria, you get to the Sahel regions, and then you have very far-flung communities. That becomes a challenge. And that's why I was saying that, when it comes to energy access, we're going to see that adoption of some renewable technologies can help in providing mini-grids and solar plants. The other thing about financing is the issue of tariffs, affordability. By the time you translate these to cents and dollars, you find out that they are pretty expensive. And therefore, you have these depressed tariff that would not allow and encourage investment. And the last part of it is the governance and the investment environment. So many of the African countries seem not to stay with one policy and run it through the period. But places like Kenya has shown that if the government stays focused and drives its reform, they could actually make progress. But you've seen what's happened in Nigeria in the last couple of years, where we have multiple exchange windows, we have low tariffs, and then we have, more importantly, governance issues about how the sector is driven. So the challenges, again, just to say, you have tariffs, you have geography, you have leadership, governance, and unstable economic climate.
Now, I would ask these questions three in one because you mentioned something about funding. Now, why is funding such a big dilemma in the whole just energy transition? And how can Africa increase its power generation capacity? Also, do you see any major improvements in the near to medium term?
Justin, I think that the most important part of this is leadership and governance, right? You also have to look at the solution that works for you. So most of the African nations now have challenges trying to access capital outside of Africa and from other regimes where there's an imposition that we cannot fund gas-fired projects, we cannot fund coal-fired projects, we cannot fund anything but that is renewable. We have to take the narrative and then begin to work. I believe that, yes, there is a need for foreign investments for most of the African nations. But, just think about how much Nigeria is wasted on subsidies, both petrol, electricity, that if they were invested in real capital, capital investments, things will turn around. So we tend to look for help outside when we should actually domesticate our resources and do something for us. So, yeah, that's where the funding is it's a problem. Again, I've talked about investment climate. It has to be stable. And then there are a lot of funds that are in different savings that could actually do much more in the infrastructure space in Africa. And I keep thinking about Nigeria as one example.
Now, can you tell me what the current progress is like in Africa when it comes to the demand for clean energy?
Well, countries are making progress. So, of course, you know that the North African countries are like Morocco, Algeria. These are places that already have almost 100% electricity access and are taking advantage of the abundance of solar, high solar irradiation to make huge investments in power generation. Then you have Kenya, which by now I think it's top 5 geothermal in the world. They have adopted renewable energy strongly. They have wind, they have geothermal, and the adoption is strong. South Africa just concluded the 6th round of their procurement of solar from, renewables from IPPs. I believe the last time it was about 450 megawatts of solar and about 400 of wind, and then there's an additional concentrated solar energy. And in South Africa, we've seen prices go from 35 cents in 2011 to just under 3 cents, right? In the last bid. Well, of course, we say 3 cents, but we have to ask what is in there, what have they provided, the type of support to that tariff that it's come down low. But the point being made is that there's progress that's been done. And one thing you have to that you have to note is that there's got to be consistency, right? You can't do start and stop. So South Africa is gained all this because, first round, second, third, fourth, and they built a reputation, and therefore developers could actually come and offer their best and the margins continue to drop. Same thing with Kenya. When Kenya started, it was quite expensive. But over the years, as they continue to honor their obligations to developers and power producers, they began to see that both the prices are coming down and then also the required government support in terms of credit guarantees, payment guarantees have also begun to decline. So in effect, the tariffs are coming down lower and lower. So we see good trends happening. For Nigeria, there are some mini grids that are coming up, but we're still very far from getting some on the grid to contribute to the grid power. But there's a lot of adoption. I'm sure you know this. Rooftop and what have you.
No, so what can other countries learn from countries like Kenya and Egypt? Egypt has already gone far in terms of renewable energy adoption and the balance. Now, what can other countries learn from countries like Kenya and Egypt, and how can the governments on the continent ensure a balance in their energy mix?
Well, I think the Egyptian model is slightly different from Kenya. I think that of Egypt is driven primarily by the state, right? So the state is providing for the electricity, it's raising the funds and constructing those power plants. Even the first one it did with Siemens and what have you. In case of Kenya, it's a totally IPP market, right? So if you look at Egypt, I think that a country like Nigeria should be looking towards the Egyptian model to close the gap that it really has now, because we have scarified the investment landscape in such a way that it will take time to raise capital for infrastructure again, right? In 2013, 2014, 2015, 2011, we're very bullish of a private sector driven power space. But what we've seen in the last couple of years is made it very difficult. It will take time. There could be some projects, 50 megawatts there, 30 megawatts here in franchise areas and what have you. But that we need to industrialize, especially when it comes to network, transmission and distribution, the government might have to, or governments, so that's both federal and state, might have to do things about that. Now, for countries but while we do that, we could also practice the Kenya model where you're procuring power from independents, but keeping steady, right? No start and stop, just having different rounds and continuing rounds, and that way you can build investor confidence. So both things can go together for countries that want to have a state intervention while at the same time growing an IPP market. You can adopt both Kenyan and an Egyptian model to get there.
Thank you for those insights into what Africa is doing to ensure efficient distribution systems on the continent. Rumundaka Wonodi, founder and CEO at ZKJ Energy Partners and pioneer CEO of the Nigerian Bulk Electricity Trading Company. Thank you so much for your time, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And that's it from me. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.